Well, thank you again, everyone. Thank you for being with us. We're delighted that you are here. And this morning, as I mentioned last week, this morning we're going to be looking at love in terms of relationships. And the title of the talk is Relationships as a Spiritual Path. Not relationships on a spiritual path, but relationships as a spiritual path. You know, sometimes I think we get this picture that we're kind of walking this this trail that goes up to the top of the mountain, and at times people will join us on the path, and they'll walk with us for a little ways, and they will leave. At times we will leave the path, and we will go find another path, and that much is true. It certainly seems that way, but I want to take it to a deeper level. In addition to being on the path and having somebody with us in a relationship, whether that relationship be a romantic relationship or just be a friendly relationship or a student-teacher relationship, it doesn't matter. They're all just different ways of expressing the oneness. But instead of thinking of us being on a path and sometimes people are with us, I'd like us to take it to a deeper level today if we can. And I want to think about the possibility that the relationship is the path. The relationship can be the path if we choose to allow it to be the path. Remember the three yogas, the three paths, the three main paths to God. There's the yoga of love. That's what we're talking about, the yoga of love, relationships. There's the yoga of knowledge. And as a teaching, that's what Science of Mind is, the yoga of knowledge. We study, we apply ourselves, we learn, we question, we think, all for the purpose of revealing to us that there's something more, there's something greater. And as Dr. Holmes says, eventually we just want to be at home with the beloved. We move into that mystical experience of unity, that mystical experience of oneness. The Buddhists kind of explain it as a raft. The teaching is the raft. So we come to an awareness that there's a river or a lake or an ocean. There's a body of water that separates us from our desired state, our experience of oneness. And we build a raft, and the purpose of the raft is to carry us across. And we get on that raft and we paddle and we get across. And once we get across to the other shore, there's a couple things that happen. The first is we no longer need the raft. The raft is no longer important. It has served its purpose. It moved us from one place to another. And that's the teaching. That's the teaching in the Buddhist thought. Once you have arrived at the other shore, how you got there isn't so important. It is the fact that you were there. So it would be silly to continue to carry the raft on your back as you walked about on the distant shore. It would be silly to spend your entire time talking about the activity you went through as you built the raft. It served its purpose. You're now at home with the beloved. And the other thing that happens in the way the Buddhists explain it, is that when you arrive at the distant shore, you realize that you never really left. There was no place to go. That the separation was only a separation in consciousness. It was only an idea. There is no here, there is no there. There is no way that we can truly be separated. We can only believe that we are separated. So that the raft then, the vehicle, the teaching is a tool that helps us to dissolve, to eliminate the ideas of separation. Our spiritual practice of meditation and of treatment are tools that help us to dissolve the ideas of separation. but the end point as we know it, the goal, if we want to call it that, and I just use that for lack of a better word, is this experience of unity, this experience of oneness. So this day we're talking about Valentine's Day is coming up, and Valentine's Day, of course, the people that sell cards, candies, and flowers, and rent hotel rooms and those things, they've kind of turned it into a great commercial holiday. People from all walks of life are buying cards and buying candy and buying flowers and taking their special someone out for a romantic evening and a dinner on the town, in a wonderful hotel suite, and all of these expressions of love, and they're all good. They're all good. They're all just ways that we as human beings kind of express our feeling of this thing called love. And as I talked last week, right, what is love? What is the definition of love? And we have to keep in mind that everybody has a different definition, or everybody at least could have a different definition of what love is. Right? It's not something that a scientist can put on a scale and weigh, or take out a caliper and measure. They can't take a little light and look in your eye and see how much love is in there. So it's not the kind of thing that's a material thing that can be examined through the scientific process. We acknowledge it's there. Psychologists acknowledge it's there, because it seems to be a common human experience. Right? Of course, everybody will talk about being in love. Everybody will talk about children will love their parents. They'll love one another. Patriots will love their country. Mathematicians will love their math. Artists will love their music. We all have this concept of this something that's called love. But there's no way of knowing if we all really understand it the same way. So what we want to talk about today, where we want to go today, is a little bit of why are we here? What is the purpose of this life? Why are we here in this place, experiencing life through the filters of these bodies and this consciousness, this mind? And how can the relationships that we are in, whether it be a business relationship, whether it be just a casual meeting somebody for a moment on the street relationship, whether it be a friendship, whether it be a partnership, whether it be a business partnership, for example, or working together on projects, kind of an activity-based partnership, or a life partnership. How do relationships help us in our purpose? What is our purpose to be here? So we need to start then with some idea of at least the purpose of this talk, what we're considering our life's purpose to be. And who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? The three big questions in life. And if we stop and think about the ordinary human way of looking at things, the way that societies in general have looked at things, we have to keep in mind that there's a great bias in our culture towards doing. It's like, what have you done for me lately? What are you doing for me? What you have done is most important. And when you look at life through that filter of doing is important, a lot of times what comes up for people is as well, it's what you've accomplished, what you've done, what have you built in your lives. Have you built a big business? Have you built a home? Have you raised a family? And a lot of the ideas of what we are here for become twisted around into what we have done. what we have done. And the flip side of that is if you haven't accomplished anything, that you haven't done anything, you've missed the boat. Back just a little bit. We need to step back a little bit and consider the words of Dr. Holmes. It's very important and very profound when I read these. He said, it's not necessary that you and I make an impact or an impression on anyone. He says it's not necessary for the tree in the forest to build anything, to do anything. Be a tree. Just be a tree. He says the purpose of our life is to live. The purpose of our life is to simply live it. And that takes us completely away from the doing to the question, well, is he saying, nothing? There's, just breathe in, breathe out, and repeat, and that's the secret of life? And I don't think that he meant that at all. But I think what he was saying is that we should live according to our position in life, not our social position, but according to our capabilities is perhaps a better word, a better term. The capabilities of a tree are to grow in the forest. They take in sunlight, they give off oxygen, they take in minerals, they grow. Eventually they fall and they fertilize other trees. Now scientists are telling us that through the root system of the forest, that all the trees are connected and they communicate chemically. That when we're looking at a forest, we're not just looking at a group of individual trees standing in one place. We are looking at a total ecosystem, a total living system. But the capability of the tree is to be a tree. And the capability of us is to be what? To be what? So if we think about all of the things that human beings can accomplish in a lifetime, all of the great institutions that have been built, all of the businesses that have been founded, the universities and all those things, we have to keep in mind that all of those are turning to dust. All of those are going away. All of that will change. If you just saw in the headlines in the last couple of days that Yale University has now changed the name of Calhoun College because Calhoun's name is so entangled in slavery, and they don't want to use that name anymore. We're having similar issues here in South Carolina because many of the prominent places in South Carolina are named after people who were very prominent in owning slaves and oppressing people. And people are pushing back now, and they're saying we don't want to have buildings named after these men. What these men stood for does not represent who and what we are today. And my only point is that things change over time. See. So you might have the greatest reputation, you might have the greatest name, you might have built the greatest institution, but in a few hundred years, it's going to change. Step back even further and take a longer view. In a million years, what's establishment going to mean? In a million house that you built, in a million years, what's going to happen to the college that you. So this brings us to the impermanence of life, as the Buddhists would teach us, the impermanence. All of life is impermanent. Everything that we see is impermanent. Our bodies are impermanent. So we must consider then, is our purpose for being, if there is a purpose for our being? Agnostics would say, not necessarily, you're just here. It's a chemical accident of the universe. Life started itself and organized itself and wound up as you, but there's nothing more to it. There's nothing more to it than that. There is no purpose. But if there is a purpose, we have to think, if there is a purpose, then it must be something bigger than or beyond or detached from this idea of material accomplishment. Now, if we think about what is it that we as human beings can do that no other part of creation can do that we're aware of, and it's possible that others are and we're just not aware of it yet. But what is it that we can do that none other can do? And I would say it is to be self-aware. To be self-aware. We have the unique capability to think about what we are thinking about. We can consider what is thought, what is consciousness. Where do thoughts come from? Where do thoughts go? Is the thought my thought? Did I create that thought? Or am I just observing a thought as it is passing through? What happens when two inventors in different parts of the world simultaneously invent the same thing? Did they latch on to something as it passed through, or did they each arrive at it separately through a process, but separately? Einstein talked about inspiration. Tesla talked about revelation. His invention came to him in almost a mystical state. So I would say then that what we want to consider is that if we look at the thing that we are uniquely suited to do, then maybe that leads us to our purpose. Maybe it is then that if the tree is self-aware, which leads to self-realization, capital S, capital R, self-realization, that perhaps then our purpose of being here is what we are. And it has nothing ourselves to the uniqueness that is ours, self-awareness. And if we kind of take this and put it back into, remember Dr. Holmes says we are practical mystics. And he goes on and he defines a mystic. We have these black and white movies from the 30s and the 40s, and they always portray the mystics as being some kind of almost a sorcerer or a magician. The mad monks, the people living in caves, all of these kind of things. And Dr. Holmes says, no, we're not mysterious people. A mystic is someone who has a deep awareness and can sense the atmosphere of God, the presence of God, the activity of God in us, around us, and through us. That is the mystic. So the purpose of all of our studying and the purpose of all of our practice, our meditation, our treatment, our spiritual gratitude, all of the things, the behaviors that we engage in, it is all for the purpose of us coming into a deeper realization of the self with a capital S. The self is the presence of God. The presence of God not only with but everywhere about us. Omnipresent. The presence of God is as the tree, as the blade of grass, the presence of God as the milk that we had for breakfast. I mean, it just boggles the mind when you stop and think of a simple, how many of feed the animals, but not feed the animals, right? The animals then convert the grass into a different form of food. And the grass itself has evolved depending upon where on the planet it lived. It becomes wheat, it becomes corn, it becomes rice. And if you think about life on this planet, if you think about that, and our dependence to the simple blade of grass, and the intelligence that knew how to modify it appropriately along the way. Now we're starting to get into the experience of oneness, starting to the differences. See? Wheat and this is corn and this is rice. But if we move beyond them, we start to see that they all come from the same place. And the fact that you and I can eat them and our bodies know how to digest them means that there's some kind of a common ground. So a mystic then is not a mysterious person, but a person who is open to the experience of the presence and the activity of God in everyone and in everything. Particularly within ourselves. We have to start there because I can't recognize in you what I refuse to recognize in me. I can't see that, you know. And then the practical part, the practical mysticism comes in because we are in the world and we stay in the world. And by that I mean we don't go off to a cloister. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, that may be exactly appropriate for some people. We don't go live in a cave as a hermit or become a forest dweller, you know, as the times of the Buddha, they call the people the forest dwellers because they just went and lived in the forest. Because that's where they wanted to do their spiritual growth, the ascetics. We don't withdraw from the world. We don't move away from the world, even though the world is full of distractions. We stay right where we are. And our life becomes our spiritual purpose. The minute of every day is an opportunity to fulfill our purpose, which is to realize the presence of God. We do this through our practice of blessing and our practice of gratitude. When we stop to consider where our food came from, the food that we had for breakfast this day, the lunch that we will have after this service, if we sit deeply enough with it, we start to recognize that we are connected to the whole world. We are in relationship with the whole world. We're in a relationship with so many people. The people who checked you out at the grocery store, the people who stocked the shelves at the grocery store, the truckers who drove the trucks to the grocery store, the people at the factories who packaged the product and put it on the trucks, the farmers who grew it, and then all of the people who fed them, and so on, and so on, and so on. And we start to understand, you know, no man is an island. We are all connected. We are all one. So if we start to think that, well, what in the world does this have to do with relationships? It has everything to do with relationships, because if we want to know where we are on our spiritual path, we have to look at the signs around us, right? In biblical terms, there are signs following. So we can't weigh and measure our spiritual progress as we would a rock or a piece of gold or something like that. We have to look and see, how is it working in our lives? Is my life any better now than it was a year ago? Has anything changed? Am I still fighting the same battles I was fighting a year ago? Do I still have the same enemies I had a year ago? And those kind of things. And as we grow, things change in our lives. And if things aren't changing in our lives, then we're probably not growing. John Randolph Price, in his 40-day prosperity program, I think maybe it's 40 Days of Abundance or 40 Days of Prosperity, he says if you're experiencing lack of supply in your life, look at your relationships. Look at your relationships. Your relationships are a clear indicator of how open you are to giving and how open you are to receiving. I want you to think about that. All the gifts have already been given. We have to receive them. We have to open ourselves to receive them. In our relationships, how open are we to receiving from others? How are you when somebody pays you a compliment? We're taught to be humble and to be shy. But how does it really feel when somebody pays us a compliment? Are we comfortable with that? Can we receive that good? If somebody comes to give us a gift, can we receive the gift, or are we immediately thinking about how are we going to repay them? See, that's transactional. You give to me, I give to you. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Are we open and receptive? So that gives you a little glimpse about how relationships can be an indicator of where we are on our spiritual path. And now I want to talk a little bit about the different levels of relationship, and how, by understanding that applying ourselves to our relationships as a spiritual path, that several things happen. Certainly our relationships get better, but we grow more deeply in our awareness and our experience of the presence of God. And this awareness and experience of the presence of God, that is the mystical. And we can do that right here. We can do that holding a job. We can do that raising a family. We can do that in our volunteer activities. We can do that with our friends. It just takes a different intention. I think the key elements of life are intention and attention. What is it that you want, and what is it that you're paying attention to? A lot of times we say we want this, but we pay attention to that. We want world peace, but we pay attention to all the horrible news. What is it that we want? And what is it that we're paying attention to? And I hope that we come to some sense of realization that what we want is self-realization, that what we want is to experience the unity. What we want is to experience the presence of God now, not in the next lifetime, not after we die and go to heaven kind of thing, but now. See, God is here now. In the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's a line in there where Thomas says to Jesus, "Where is the kingdom? Where is the kingdom?" Remember, Jesus preached the kingdom. And he said the kingdom was within, and the kingdom was the presence of God. Seek ye first the kingdom. Go within and pray in secret. There's something that was to be discovered within us that he called the kingdom. And people didn't get that. And I understand that people don't get it. And they're looking out here and they're looking out there and they're saying, is it a country we're going to go live in, and all these kind of things. And in the Gospel of Thomas, the author cleared it up a little bit, or at least his or her perception. And Thomas says to Jesus, "Where is the kingdom?" And Jesus says, "It is everywhere present, but men do not see it." It is everywhere present, but men do not see it. What our purpose is, what our intention is, to see it, to experience it, to touch it, to feel it, to know it. Nearer than our hands and feet, closer than our breath. It is here. So when we come to relationships, relationships are a perfect place for us to do this, because if we consider what a relationship is, It is two or more unique, individualized expressions of God coming together, coming together. And that's probably all you need to say, coming together. Maybe they come together to do business. Maybe they come together and just pass each other on the street and nod politely. And maybe they come together to do some kind of work together, to build something together. But we're going to take that to a deeper level. Instead of focusing on what is it that we're building, we focus on how are we growing as we do this together. Are we growing together as we do this? And finally, there is the just being, just be at home with the beloved. If you read any of Rumi's poetry, you know, he had a friend, Shams, S-H-A-M-S was his friend's name, and he writes of his friendship with Shams in such passionate language that the people have wondered, were they lovers, you know? Because he's just so passionate about being with this person, because when he is with this person, he feels and experiences the presence of God. So in normal human life, if we look at some symbols that we get from the East, in human life, you can think of a box, a triangle, and a circle, and you can think of our relationships as progressive, or at least being experienced in three different categories. And the box represents two individuals who are coming together, and each side of the box, two sides of the box for each person. And that represents the ego and the intellect. You and I come together, but we are individuals and we are separate. And we each have our own ideas. We each have our own ego, what's important to us. You'll see this in politics and business. There's a lot of posturing going on, and everybody's trying to make sure that they get their ego needs met, that they get the best deal they possibly can. They get what they want out of it, right? And in that regard, our relationship is kind of needs being fulfilled. It's a needy event, you know. People come together. I need a car, so I go to the used car lot, or I go to the car dealership. Maybe I'll buy a new car this time. So I'm there because I need a car. They're there because they need to sell cars. So we might be able to do this transactional thing together where they sell me a car at a price that I feel satisfied I got a good deal. And they feel satisfied that they got a good deal. And of course, each of us leaves trying to convince ourselves that we got the better of the deal. And that's the secret of sales, right? They have to walk away believing they got the best deal. But that's nothing more than a transaction. That's nothing more than individuals coming together to kind of fulfill needs. And if we think of our relationships, our personal relationships, and even romantic relationships, sometimes they only exist at that level. Sometimes they only exist at that level. Two people who are coming together, even in a marriage, they're coming together, but it is just simply a convenient place to have needs fulfilled. You know, maybe somebody wants security, maybe somebody wants companionship, maybe somebody wants somebody else to take care of them. And I just got to tell you, be careful. If you think you're going to go in a relationship to get somebody to take care of you, what you're going to do is you're going to get into a relationship where you find yourself taking care of somebody else, because what you're looking for, you're looking with. That's what you're going to get. Because you're coming at it based on lack. See, you're coming at it based on need. This is what I need, and I need to go into this relationship to get my needs fulfilled. And a lot of times you hear people when there's a divorce, public divorce and the news and everything, people say, well, my needs just weren't getting fulfilled any longer, So there's this whole idea that a relationship exists in order to fulfill needs. That's the transactional level of relationship. That is the square. And that is, by the way, where most of our world is. Right? By and large, that's where most of our world lives. the rich and famous marry their children to one another to keep fortune in a close-knit group. The monarchies marry off their children to keep control of the countries, and et cetera, et cetera. I can't remember who it was. I think I was taking a psychology class over at the technical college, and they were talking about there's this kind of, at that level of relationship, there's this trade-off where the more money you have, for men, the more money they have, the more attractive or desirable a wife they can attract. So the uber rich football players, they marry the supermodels and so on down the line. And I looked at that and I said, it's kind of sad that they put it that way, but that is the epitome of the transactional based relationship. Now, in that relationship, there's not a lot of awareness of the presence of God. It's just, what can I get from you today? What are you going to do for me today? Kind of thing. How are you helping me feel better about me today? And when I no longer feel better about me when I'm around you, well, then you're fired. I need to go get somebody else, right? The relationship is over. We need to end this thing and move on. And what we want to do is we want to acknowledge that that level exists. We want to understand that typically that level doesn't help us to experience the presence of the divine when we're in that relationship, functioning at that level. The person we're negotiating with is somebody to beat. They're a competition. They're the enemy. We're not recognizing them as the presence of God. But then we kind of slip in, every once in a while we slip into the triangle. Right? And what happens at the triangle is that you still have two individuals who are still there, but for a moment, for just a moment perhaps, they lose sight of their individuality. They lose sight of the fact that they are two separate intellects, two separate egos, and suddenly they come together. They experience a oneness. They experience a oneness about something. Maybe they're working together towards a common goal. Maybe they're just being together in a loving relationship. Everything else melts away. And for that moment of bliss, for that one moment, something that was there. Remember, the Bible tells us where two or more are gathered, I am there as well. Something that was there, something that was preceding them, something that was before them, emerges. Just a glimpse of it. Just something wonderful. And what has happened is in that moment we have experienced the presence of the divine. Now you might consider this to be a relationship that has moved way beyond what we just described as the first level, and now we're starting to get into affection, we're starting to get into tenderness, we're starting to get into caring, we're starting to get into loving, we're starting to consider that I just want to be with this other person. I don't need anything. I don't want anything. I don't require anything of them. Did you see that meme that was going around Facebook? It was a quote from Rumi. It says how wonderful it is to know the joy of someone who loves you and wants nothing from you other than for you to be okay. They want nothing from you other than for you to be okay. So as our love deepens, as our love deepens in our relationships, and by love I mean the experience of the unity, the experience of the oneness, as our love starts to deepen, we start to see beyond the differences. We start to see beyond the differences in thinking, the differences in physical appearances. We start to move beyond the physical altogether, and we start to experience each other at the level of our soul. As I say, in the beginning, just for a moment, maybe for an hour. Maybe you're with your beloved and you lose a sense of time, you know. You're with your children and you're so engrossed in just being with your children and watching them grow and watching them learn that you completely forget that you're there. You're there, you're being, but this idea of I need something or I want something is gone. It is completely gone. So we move out of the rock and roll era of needy relationships where if you know, I can't live if living is without you. You know, all the songs from the 60s and the 70s, you know, don't leave me or I'll die and all this kind of stuff. That's need. And we kind of move into the Bay City Rollers where I only want to be with you. I only want to be with you. I don't want anything of you. Aquinas tells us in his book Confessions, I believe it is, you know, we arrive at a point where we say, I ask nothing of thee, not even thy love. I only want thee. And he's talking about the soul experiencing God. And that's exactly what I'm talking about here, is that we experience the very presence of God in this other person, in this other situation. And it could be a business relationship. It could be a friendly relationship. It could be a romantic relationship. Our intention is to recognize this other person as the very loving presence of God that has suited up and showed up in the costume of that other person. And to recognize that I too am the very loving presence of God that has suited up and shown up in this costume. But together we can move beyond the costumes. And the divine can experience the divine in this relationship. So now, as we're together in that kind of relationship, it's not so much about getting needs fulfilled or accomplishing anything. It's about how can we do this together in a manner that allows us to experience the presence of God more fully in each other and as each other. And now we're starting to move into spiritual love. So much of what the world has taught us about love is at the material level. And now we want to move into the spiritual level. You know, we've been taught marriage is a contract, and you need to stay in marriage because you need to honor the contract. And now we move into spiritual love that says, I don't care if there's a contract or no contract. I just want to be with you. I just want to experience the presence of God as you. And as we grow and we develop on that spiritual path, as we start to, as I say, our intention is today I experience the presence of God in you and as you more fully. Today I experience the presence of God in me and as me more fully. And today the presence of God experiences itself as us and through us more fully. What happens is that the triangle, the triangle represents that most of the time we're separate intellect, separate ego, but there are moments when we become one. The two become one. And as we continue to do a relationship as a spiritual practice, the triangle gives way to a circle. So this is as Rumi told us in his poem, the ruby at sunrise. You know, the two lovers awaken in the morning, and one says to the other, "Who do you love more, me or you?" And the other one picks up a ruby and holds it up to the rising sun, and says, "You are the sun, I am the ruby. There's no telling where the sun begins and the ruby ends. You are the very light that lights up my life. There is no otherness. There is no separateness. There is no me. There is no you. There isn't even an us. There is only the experience of the presence of the divine. So as we look at all these things you're going to hear in the next couple of days about relationships, when they tell us about how many greeting cards were sent and all these kind of things, I invite you to consider the opportunity to make your relationships your spiritual path. Everyone you come to meet, I don't care if it's the clerk in a convenience store that sells you a gallon of milk. Can you bless them? Your attention, can you give your attention to recognizing that, by God, this is a beautiful, unique expression of God working in this store, and if they weren't here to sell me this milk, I wouldn't have it. And I thank them for it. I am grateful. If it's the people you come to work with, if it's the customers who come into your store, no matter how they act, they may be very rude, sometimes they are. It doesn't change the fact that they are a unique, wonderful expression of God, and I can choose to relate to them at that level as they act out in their stupid human tricks. People are acting from fear, they're acting from ego, they're acting from the way that they were brought up. That's not who they are. That's not what they are. Can I know the truth about them? And in your most intimate relationships, those to whom you are the closest, your family, your friends, your significant others, can you take time together to be with them and to just delight in the presence of God that has shown up as them, to come into your life, to help you to grow, to help you to experience more of the presence of God? Can you look in the mirror and say the same about yourself? And I want to close with this story. I know I've shared it before, but it's just so heartwarming to me, and it just kind of illustrates that this is a process that goes on forever. I used to travel a lot back in the 90s, and I was in Atlanta. I was in Hartsfield Airport in Atlanta, and I was waiting for my plane, as frequent travelers do. There's not a whole lot to do if you don't have the Admiral's Club card. You sit at the gate and you wait, So I started to watch people as people come and people go, and there was a great commotion down the concourse somewhere. I could hear people talking, there was a lot of hustling and bustling, and as I looked down there was this glow of light, and I had no idea what it was. It was just the hall at that one spot. The hall was just shining. There was this bright lights down there, and I didn't know what it was. And as I was looking, this glow of light was moving towards me, and I couldn't imagine what it was. And as it passed me, what it was, President Jimmy Carter, who was long out of office by then, but President Jimmy Carter and his wife Rosie Lynn were coming through the airport to get a plane somewhere in Atlanta. And the media was surrounding them, and all of the cameras were on, and the videographers were walking with their lights on. The on-air people holding their mic and asking questions, and I thought, well, that's kind of, President Carter and Rosalynn were just kind of smiling and answering the questions as they were walking. They passed. Everything seemed to go back to normal. And I looked up, and here came an elderly man. I would say he was in his mid to late 80s, maybe even his early 90s. And if you think of Charlie Weaver, the character that Chuck Arquette in the Match Game all the time, how he dressed, this would be how this man dressed. Now, he was much skinnier. He was a frail-looking man. but he had an old kind of beige or tan shirt that was almost clean. You can imagine it. There was a gravy spot under the vest somewhere. He had an old tie that he had put on that was not tied quite right. He had a little dress hat on. His pants were kind of baggy. His shoes were kind of worn. And he was coming down through the concourse almost in a shuffle. And he was holding this bouquet of flowers in his hand. And the flowers looked like flowers that he had picked. Kind of things that you get in the airport. Looked like something that he went out and pulled. And he went to the gate directly across from where I was. And the flight was coming in, and of course, in those days, you could go past security to meet people at the gate. And there were a lot of people there waiting to meet their friends and family, and eventually the door opens, and I don't know if you've been to the airport, the door opens and the first people off are usually business travelers who are running like crazy. And they come out and they blast on the way, and then other people start coming off. One by one, people would meet, they'd wave, and they'd meet the person they were waiting for. And this gentleman was he was short, and he was kind of trying to peer over the crowd in front of him, and he's holding this bouquet of flowers up in his hand. And little by little, the crowd disappeared. As people came off and the folks who were waiting for them joined up with them, the crowd started to thin out, and you could get a better view of the people as they were coming out of the jetway. And this man was just standing there, and he was moving about very uncomfortably. Whoever he was looking for hadn't come out of the plane yet, You can imagine what was going through his head. And then finally she came. Finally she came down the jetway. A sweet little old lady who was also in her late 80s, maybe her early 90s. Dressed as old people used to dress in those days. She had on a overcoat and just completely dressed. And their eyes, and there was magic. He was with his beloved. It never ends. It never ends. No matter how old we get, we can always take the time to have the intention to pay attention, to recognize the people around us as the very loving presence of God. That is how we make our relationships our spiritual path. We don't need any special equipment. We don't need to go any place in particular. We just need to be at home with our beloved and recognize the presence of God within. So I invite you this Valentine's Day. Start in the mirror. Learn to love the one you see. And then learn to truly love everyone about you. And so it is.